Take care of your grandson and do the housework without complaining. That's all you're good for. Don't get too comfortable, you're just a housemaid. That's what my husband Austin said to me. My son Carrie said, "You should be grateful we let you take care of the grandson. It adds structure to your life and prevents dementia." As he said this to me, exhausted and staggering. To these two, I was always a stranger, no matter how much time passed. I've tried so hard to be recognized by them, but I've reached my limit. It's time to end this, but not without a fight. I'm going to make them realize what they've put me through. I am Marian, a 55-year-old homemaker. My husband Austin is a president of a renowned company, and we live a comfortable life financially. My son Carrie is married to Lori, a stylish and beautiful woman, and now they live with us. A year ago, my grandson Mort was born. He's a handful, but very affectionate towards me, and I find him absolutely adorable. You might think I lead a blissful life from all this, but the reality is different. It was the son and his wife who suggested we live together, but not out of concern for us. They wanted to dump the housework and childcare on me. Lori's been tired since the baby was born. It's tough on her. So, Dad, is it okay if we move in here? Carrie asked, relying on my husband Austin. Austin readily agreed. Of course. We have spare rooms, and you're welcome anytime. When I was confused by the sudden discussion, Carrie said with a malicious smile, "Well then, I'll be counting on you for the housework and childcare, Auntie." Austin then added, laughing, "What a considerate son," whether he knew of his son's scheme or not. Carrie calls me Auntie because he and I are not related by blood. His real mother left when he was 5, and I came into this house when he was 8. I was 33 at that time. The sudden arrival of a strange woman must have been confusing for Carrie. It's understandable. I felt sorry for Carrie, who lost his mother at a young age, and tried to be as kind as possible, but he never warmed up to me and has always been defiant. Carrie never acknowledged me as his mother, and Austin said, "Until my son accepts you, we can't officially marry." So even after 22 years in this house, we're still not legally married. That makes Austin my common-law husband, and Carrie is legally a stranger. I always hoped to be recognized one day, so I did my best with the housework and tried to connect with Carrie, no matter how terribly he treated me. And of course, I wanted Austin's recognition too, so I've been devoted to him as well. Despite my efforts, I was still not acknowledged by this family and continued to receive harsh treatment in a house where I had no allies. For years now, I've been treated as nothing more than a housemaid. The biggest shock was not being invited to Carrie's wedding. I actually have a child on the way. Carrie dropped this bombshell when he first brought Lori home. Lori was 27, younger than Carrie, and said she'd been helping with housework. I used to hear about housewives a lot, but in today's society where women can thrive, being a housewife at her age seemed unusual. I realized she just didn't like working. With Lori pregnant, they were looking to have the wedding as soon as possible and started discussing it. Suddenly, Carrie turned to me and said, "Oh, Auntie doesn't need to come. We're not even planning a seat for you." Shocked, I blurted out, "Carrie, that's too much." Austin didn't take my side, saying, "Well, legally, she's a stranger. Some old acquaintances might mistake her as my wife, but if Carrie is against it, we can't help it." Lori added, "Hey, what's this conversation about? She's just the housemaid, right?" When Carrie explained, Lori agreed. "Oh, a stranger. Then she doesn't need to come to the wedding." So I wasn't invited. I've lived with Carrie all these years. When he had a fever, I cared for him all night. I loved seeing him grow and nurtured him with all my love, even in Austin's absence. But this event starkly reminded me that to Austin and Carrie, I was just a stranger. Carrie and Lori moved out to enjoy their newlywed life, but returned after a year, now with a child. My bad feeling intensified when they casually discussed moving back in. "I'm kinda experiencing parental burnout, so I'd like to rely on the housemaid for babysitting," Lori said. My fears were confirmed. Right after moving in, Lori tried to dump all childcare on me. I am not a housemaid. Please stop calling me that, I told Lori. Carrie, she's only mean to me, Lori cried to Carrie. Carrie glared at me and said, "Who cares what you call her? Lori, just call her Auntie. I do." Okay, I'll call her Auntie too, Lori said with a smile. And so, Auntie, please look after the child for a bit. They left quickly, leaving 1-year-old Mort with me. Mort was a lovely child with big bright eyes and fair skin. Carrie, not exactly handsome, looked entirely like Lori. Since Austin and I never had children, this was my first time taking care of such a small child. Unable to neglect Mort after being left with him, I spent my time playing and taking walks with him. Lori learned to be comfortable with me taking care of the kids, and from then on, I took care of Mort almost every day, in addition to the daily chores. Lori, despite being a homemaker, did no household chores, and often went out while Carrie was at work. On Carrie's days off, they frequently went out together, not returning until night. Mort, mostly in my company, grew very attached to me. But a 1-year-old boy, adorable as he may be, is a handful. He'd climb onto tables when I briefly went to the bathroom or grab cigarette butts if an ashtray was left unattended. I had several close calls every day, leaving me exhausted. After a month of this routine, the stress of daily chores and caring for a small child began to take its toll on my body. Then Lori said, "Since he's so fond of you, Auntie, sleep with him at night too." I love Mort, but I'm getting older and need some rest. Please, at least take care of him at night, I responded. See, this is the problem with people who've never had kids. I'm suffering from parental burnout, Lori retorted angrily. Carrie, too, said, "You should be grateful we let you take care of the grandson. It adds structure to your life and prevents dementia," completely disregarding my fatigue. Austin showed no interest in these matters. In fact, he had been spending more nights out lately. Austin, always a womanizer, took advantage of our unofficial marriage to continue his affairs. I used to ask him to stop, leading to fights, but I always ended up giving in. With my parents gone and no siblings, I had no one to turn to. Knowing this, and that I hadn't worked for a long time, Austin was bold. Leaving the house seemed impossible. Though his love for me had long faded, he kept me for household and personal care. In return, I've lived financially comfortably, unable to confront Austin strongly. However, one holiday morning, Carrie said, "We're going out as a family today." "Where to?" asked Austin. "We're invited to Lori's parents. We'll stay overnight." Relieved at the thought of some respite, I decided to contact a friend for a coffee date. "Austin, since Carrie and his family are out, I'm going to go out with a friend," I told Austin. "Okay, what time will you be back?" he asked, unusually interested in my return time. "I'll be back around 6 in the evening," I replied. "All right, take your time," he said, surprisingly kindly. Perhaps it was the rare chance of being alone together that made him seem gentler. "I'll buy some steak for dinner since it's just the two of us today. Let's eat together," I said before leaving the house. Austin could be kind to me at times. I was looking forward to having dinner together. After a 15-minute bus ride, I arrived at my favorite cafe, known for its delicious coffee and cakes. "Marian, it's been a while," greeted Juliet as I entered. She was already seated, waiting for me. We ordered coffee and cake sets and began catching up. "I've been living with my son and his wife for about a month now," I said, knowing most people would envy such a situation. But Juliet knew my family's dynamics well. "Oh, that must be tough for you, Marianne." "His wife sounds quite troublesome," Juliet sympathized. "Marianne, are you planning to stay in that house forever? Don't you want to become independent and leave?" I couldn't handle it mentally. She expressed her concern. "Thank you. I've thought about leaving many times, but for now I can live without worrying about basic needs." "Some people have it much harder," I admitted. I had indeed considered leaving several times, but the fear of being lost without a home held me back. "Remember, if it gets too hard, you can always talk to me," Juliet offered. We were college friends. But Juliet, unlike me, had pursued a career and was now a successful editor-in-chief at a major publishing company. We weren't very close back then, but reconnected by chance about 10 years ago. Since then, we've been meeting for coffee and updates regularly. She was a valuable friend who patiently listened to my family grievances without judgment. Our time together was uplifting, and I felt refreshed from the usual stress. After saying goodbye to Juliet and buying steak, I returned home to find a heavily made-up woman in revealing clothes at the entrance. She glanced at me and left without a word. "Austin, who was that woman just now?" I asked, finding him in the living room, seemingly pleased and sipping wine. "A friend," Austin casually replied when I asked about the woman. The dining table had remnants of a meal she seemed to have prepared. "What did you eat?" I asked. "She made steak. It was delicious," Austin said cheerfully, completely forgetting what I had mentioned earlier about making dinner. Or maybe he never listened in the first place. To him, spending time with me was insignificant. That's all I was worth to him. I felt a sudden drop from the brief happiness to despair, overwhelmed and unable to think. I had reached my limit. Actually, well beyond it, long ago. This trivial incident triggered an onslaught of sadness and anger. My mind and body screamed for an escape. I ignored Austin, who was cheerfully talking about something. His mood shifted abruptly from cheerful to disgruntled when he realized I was ignoring him. "I don't know what's bothering you, but you should just quietly take care of the grandson and do the housework. That's all you're good for. Don't get too comfortable, you're just a housemaid," he shouted angrily. Ignoring Austin's pleased chatter, I went to my room, packed a simple bag, and left the house. "Good riddance. Don't come back. We're not legally married, so don't expect any compensation. You'll come crawling back anyway, you troublesome housemaid," Austin jeered. His words didn't affect me. Without a destination in mind, I called Juliet, who had always been supportive. After briefly explaining the situation over the phone, she invited me to her place. When I arrived at Juliet's house, I was ushered into the living room. Juliet told me that she was single and had a high income, so she had spent a lot of money on the house she lived in. I sat on her luxurious sofa and sipped warm coffee, tears streaming down my face. Once I calmed down, Juliet unexpectedly suggested, "Marianne, why don't you write an autobiography?" Out of the blue? Who would read about an ordinary person like me? I was surprised. "It's not sudden. I've thought about it after hearing your stories. Your husband may be horrible, but he's a well-known figure in his industry. Exposing the inside story of a famous company's president would be interesting," she said. I doubted such a book would sell, but Juliet continued. "You don't have an income, Marianne, but book royalties could change that. As an editor for years, I know what the public wants to read and when. Plus," Juliet paused, then added, "if this succeeds, it would also be revenge for another friend of mine." From that day, I started living with Juliet and began writing. Having studied literature, I had a foundation in writing, which helped progress the autobiography smoothly. For a while after leaving the house, I heard nothing from them, but about a month later, I received countless calls from Austin and Carrie, phoning multiple times a day. Curious if it might add to my autobiography, I decided to answer once. "Yes?" "Where the hell are you? The house is a mess. Come back and clean it up now," Austin demanded. On the other end, Carrie also yelled, "And take care of Mort. Get back here and do what you're supposed to do." I simply replied, "Impossible," and hung up. They were only thinking of themselves as usual. I was foolish to hope for an apology from Austin. This only fueled my determination for the autobiography, and with Juliet's help, I often sacrificed sleep to write. 2 months later, my autobiography was published. Juliet had used the influence of several internet influencers to kickstart the book's success. Though written by a mere housewife, it detailed the hidden life of a woman crushed under the glamorous facade of a prominent businessman. The book gradually gained popularity, revealing the raw truths about Austin, Carrie, and Lori. I heard from Juliet that Austin faced public condemnation, and was removed as president at the company's annual shareholder meeting. Carrie, who worked at Austin's company, resigned due to unbearable scrutiny. This has also avenged my friend. Thank you, Marion. Our meeting 10 years ago wasn't coincidental. Juliet's best friend was Austin's ex-wife and Carrie's mother. She had suffered terribly at Austin's hands, leading to her current stay in a mental health facility. Realizing this, my situation seemed somewhat better, but Juliet viewed my treatment as equally appalling. Juliet, researching Austin for a friend, had discovered me, his common-law wife, and decided to approach me. While she harbored thoughts of revenge, she didn't know how to proceed until our friendship deepened, and she became my confidant. She never imagined that an actual opportunity for revenge would arise. It seemed like a lesson. Bad actions lead to bad consequences. After a long and twisted path, Austin and Carrie's world collapsed. The exposure of Austin to the public eye led to a whistleblower revealing his embezzlement of company funds. Once, Austin called me pleading, "I was wrong, please help me." I responded, "There's nothing I can do for you now. Take care." And then I blocked his number. It seems Lori's parents also read my autobiography and consequently disowned both Carrie and Lori. They must now lead a constrained life, relying solely on themselves. However, my concern lies with Mort. I hope Carrie and Lori will strive for their child's sake. Juliet mentioned feeling guilty for initially approaching me with revenge in mind. But in the end, she helped me immensely, and without her, I couldn't have escaped my hellish life. The book's royalties provided me an income. Juliet, I'm thinking of moving back to my hometown, Anchorage. But you'll always be my friend. Thank you, I told her. The media's presence around me and the desire for a fresh start drove my decision to move to Anchorage. A few days after settling there, Juliet shared the latest on Austin and his family. Firstly, Carrie and Lori divorced. It turns out Carrie wasn't Mort's biological father, a fact Lori accidentally revealed during an argument. I had always sensed something was off. Mort never resembled Carrie. Post-divorce, Carrie, unable to handle household chores, moved into a cheap apartment with Austin, who has sold his mansion to pay off debts. Their life, I heard, was in disarray. As for me, I rented an apartment near my old home. Knowing royalties alone wouldn't suffice, I took a part-time job for extra income. I've reconnected with old classmates and acquaintances, which has been enjoyable. My weekends are filled with social dancing and watercolor painting, hobbies I've always wanted to pursue. Living with that family, my world was incredibly narrow, but stepping out into the world, I discovered a life that's comfortable and joyful. I believe there are others out there who might be in a similar situation as I was. I hope they find the courage to take even a small step forward.